In just 62 seconds, one sentence about polygraph transparency destroyed FBI Director Kash Patel's carefully constructed defense and exposed the most brazen double standard in federal law enforcement history. Senator Dick Durbin didn't expect Patel to admit it so quickly. The chamber didn't expect a confession this damning. Cameras captured every moment of panic. What did Durbin reveal about Dan Bongino's security clearance that made Patel realize he'd been caught protecting someone who should never have had access to America's most classified secrets? December 11th, 2025, 2:34 p.m., Hart Senate Office Building, Room 216. The Senate Judiciary Committee chamber carried the suffocating tension that comes before institutional collapse. FBI Director Kash Patel sat at the witness table, his Navy suit pressed sharp, his FBI badge gleaming under the harsh television lights, his expression carefully controlled to reveal nothing. He had survived 3 brutal hours of questioning about immigration enforcement, counterterrorism priorities, and budget allocations. Republican members had praised his leadership. Democratic members had probed his controversial decisions. But no one had yet mentioned the scandal that would define his legacy. Senator Dick Durbin sat across from him, the Illinois Democrat who chaired the Judiciary Committee with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades mastering the art of congressional oversight. What Patel didn't realize was that Durbin had spent 6 weeks building a trap so perfect, so airtight, that no amount of deflection or bureaucratic double talk could escape it. Today's target wasn't just Patel's judgment. It was the systematic destruction of FBI security protocols to protect a Trump loyalist who should never have been given access to the nation's most sensitive intelligence. At exactly 2:34 p.m., Chairman Durbin recognized himself for questioning. The chamber fell into expectant silence. Political reporters leaned forward in the press gallery. C-SPAN cameras zoomed in on both men's faces. Everyone sensed something significant was about to happen, though no one could have predicted the explosive 62-second confession that would dominate news cycles for weeks. Director Patel, Durbin began, his voice carrying the measured calm of someone holding all the cards. I want to ask you about FBI security protocols, specifically regarding polygraph examinations for senior officials with access to classified intelligence. The opening was procedural, almost boring. But trained observers noticed Patel's micro-expression shift. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His hands, which had been resting calmly on the witness table throughout 3 hours of testimony, suddenly moved to grip the edges with white-knuckled intensity. These were tells that Durbin, with his decades of prosecutorial-style questioning, recognized immediately as signs of a witness preparing to evade. Senator, Patel replied carefully, his voice steady but lacking the confident authority he had displayed throughout earlier questioning about violent crime statistics. The FBI maintains robust security screening processes for all personnel with access to sensitive information. Our protocols meet or exceed standards across the intelligence community. It was a perfectly calibrated evasion, the kind of bureaucratic deflection that creates plausible deniability while technically avoiding a direct lie. It was also the exact response Durbin had anticipated and prepared to demolish. Director Patel, Durbin continued, opening a folder with theatrical precision that suggested weeks of careful preparation. But let me ask you something very specific about those robust protocols you just mentioned. He held up a document bearing official FBI letterhead. Classification markings, confidential/law enforcement sensitive, were clearly visible even from the press gallery. The document was real, official, and devastating. How many senior FBI officials have received waivers exempting them from the standard polygraph examination requirement during your tenure as director? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Patel's carefully controlled expression cracked just slightly. Around the chamber, senators and staffers froze mid-motion, recognizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Senator, Patel stammered, his composure beginning to fracture. Waiver decisions are made on a case-by-case basis in consultation with security personnel and are standard administrative. Yes or no, Director, Durbin interrupted, his voice sharpening. Have you granted polygraph waivers to senior officials in your administration? Patel took a breath, attempting to regain control through technical obfuscation. In rare circumstances, when security personnel determine that an individual's background and experience provide sufficient basis for confidence in their... I'll take that as a yes, Durbin said flatly. He pulled out another document, this one thicker, more detailed. Let me help you with specifics, Director. According to 4 people familiar with FBI security protocols who spoke with ProPublica, you have granted polygraph waivers to 3 senior officials, Deputy Director Dan Bongino, Congressional Liaison Marshall Yates, and your personal assistant, Nicole Rucker. Is that correct? The impact was immediate and devastating. Patel's face flushed from pale to crimson in the span of 3 seconds. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. Only a barely audible gasp that the sensitive chamber microphones picked up and transmitted to millions of viewers. Around the chamber, senators and staffers recognized they were witnessing something historic. Durbin had just named names, citing a ProPublica investigation that Patel had clearly hoped would remain buried in the news cycle. But more importantly, he had named Dan Bongino, the former Secret Service agent turned conservative podcaster turned FBI deputy director, Trump's personal choice, someone who had spent years calling FBI agents thugs and deep state operatives before being given the second highest position in the Bureau. Senator Patel finally managed, his voice trembling slightly. Personnel matters and security clearance decisions are confidential and cannot be discussed in open session without compromising. Director Patel, Durbin's voice rose with controlled fury as he interrupted. These aren't just personnel matters. These are security protocols that have been in place for 40 years. Protocols designed to ensure that people with access to the president's daily brief, CIA operations, and NSA intercepts can be trusted with America's most sensitive secrets. And you waived them for your deputy director. The accusation hung in the air with devastating clarity. Every person in that chamber understood what had just been exposed. The FBI director had exempted his own deputy, someone with daily access to the nation's most classified intelligence, from the security screening that every other FBI employee was required to pass. But Durbin wasn't finished building his trap. He was about to spring the part that would destroy Patel's career in exactly 62 seconds. Director Patel, Durbin said, his voice now carrying absolute moral authority, let me ask you about something else that ProPublica reported. Something that will help this committee understand the double standard you've created inside the FBI. He pulled out yet another document, this one containing what appeared to be internal FBI communications. The classification stamps were clearly visible to every camera in the room. At the same time you were granting polygraph waivers to your inner circle, you were ordering mass polygraph examinations for dozens of FBI agents. Not routine security screenings, Director. Loyalty tests. Tests where agents were asked a very specific question. Durbin paused, letting the tension build. The chamber was absolutely silent. Have you ever said anything negative about Director Kash Patel? The revelation exploded through the room like a physical shockwave. Democratic members gasped audibly. Republican members looked at each other in genuine shock. Reporters were frantically typing. Patel sat frozen, his face now completely drained of color. That's the question, Director, Durbin continued, his voice ice cold with prosecutorial precision. Dozens of career FBI agents, people who have served this country for decades, investigated terrorism, dismantled criminal networks, risked their lives in the field. You subjected them to polygraph examinations to determine whether they had criticized you personally, while simultaneously exempting your own deputy director from any polygraph examination at all. The hypocrisy was so stark, so undeniable, that even Patel's Republican defenders on the committee fell silent. This wasn't partisan politics. This was institutional corruption exposed in real time. At 2:36 p.m., exactly 2 minutes into his questioning, Durbin deployed the trap that would force Patel's confession in precisely 62 seconds. Director Patel, Durbin said, leaning forward with the intensity of a prosecutor about to spring a perfect trap. I'm going to give you an opportunity right now to clarify something for the American people. Something that will help us understand whether you're running the FBI according to law and protocol or whether you're running it as a personal loyalty enforcement operation. He held up a document, turning it so the cameras could capture the FBI seal and classification markings. This is an internal memorandum from FBI Chief Security Officer dated November 3rd, 2025. Subject line, polygraph examination results for senior personnel. It documents that Deputy Director Dan Bongino received what the memo calls a disqualifying alert on his initial polygraph examination. The room went completely silent. A disqualifying alert was FBI terminology for failing a polygraph, showing deception on critical questions about foreign contacts, criminal activity, or security risks. According to this memo, Durbin continued, his voice carrying the devastating precision of documented truth. Bongino's polygraph results indicated deception on multiple questions related to unauthorized contacts with foreign nationals and undisclosed financial relationships. The examining polygrapher recommended immediate termination of the security clearance process and removal from consideration for any position requiring access to classified information. Patel's hands were now visibly trembling on the witness table. His lawyers were frantically passing him notes, but he seemed unable to focus on them. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd walked into a trap with no escape. But instead of following that recommendation, Durbin said, his voice rising slightly, you granted Dan Bongino a waiver. You personally signed a document exempting him from the polygraph requirement. And you gave him access to the president's daily brief, CIA operations, NSA intercepts, every single piece of classified intelligence that crosses your desk, despite the fact that he showed deception on questions about foreign contacts and financial relationships. The accusation was so damning, so specific, that Patel's entire defense strategy collapsed in real time. There was no way to spin this, no bureaucratic language that could explain away giving security clearance to someone who had failed the examination designed to prevent exactly this kind of security risk. Director Patel, Durbin said, his voice now carrying the weight of institutional betrayal. I'm going to ask you a yes or no question, and I want you to think very carefully before answering, because your response will be under oath and will be part of the permanent congressional record. The chamber held its collective breath. Did Dan Bongino pass his polygraph examination? Yes or no? For 3 seconds, timed later by journalists reviewing footage, Kash Patel sat in absolute silence. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked at his lawyers, but they had no answer for a simple binary question. He looked at the Republican members of the committee, but even they were avoiding eye contact, understanding that this question had no good answer. At 2:37 p.m., exactly 62 seconds after Durbin had begun his trap, Kash Patel made the confession that would end his career. I do not have personal knowledge of the specific polygraph results, Patel stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. But the waiver was granted based on Deputy Director Bongino's extensive background in federal law enforcement. And Director Durbin interrupted, his voice like a hammer. That's not what I asked. I asked a yes or no question. Did Dan Bongino pass his polygraph examination? Patel took a shuddering breath. His face was now covered in visible sweat under the television lights. His hands gripped the witness table so tightly his knuckles had turned completely white. Based on the information available to me at the time, the polygraph results were inconclusive, and Director Patel, Durbin's voice thundered through the chamber. Stop evading. Did he pass or did he fail? At 2:37 p.m. and 38 seconds, Kash Patel said the words that would destroy him. The polygraph examination indicated some areas of concern that warranted further review, but he failed, Durbin stated flatly, not as a question, but as a documented fact. Dan Bongino failed his FBI polygraph examination, showed deception on critical security questions, and you gave him a waiver anyway. You gave him access to America's most classified intelligence, despite the fact that he couldn't pass the security screening that every other FBI employee is required to pass. Yes or no, Director, is that what happened? For exactly 5 seconds, Kash Patel said nothing. The silence was absolute. And then in a voice so quiet that the chamber microphones barely picked it up, he said the word that would define his legacy, yes. The chamber exploded. Democratic members jumped to their feet. Republicans looked at each other in genuine shock, recognizing that their FBI director had just confessed to one of the most serious security breaches in modern FBI history. Reporters were frantically filing breaking news alerts. The press gallery erupted into chaos. But Durbin wasn't finished. Even his chairman, Durbin was the chairman. Even as senators shouted and security officers moved to restore order, Durbin delivered the knockout blow that would expose the full scope of Patel's institutional betrayal. Director Patel, Durbin said, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute moral authority, let me make sure the American people understand what you just admitted under oath. He stood up, holding the FBI security memo aloft so every camera could capture it. You gave a polygraph waiver to a man who failed questions about foreign contacts and financial relationships. You gave him access to intelligence that foreign adversaries would kill to obtain. You made him the second highest ranking official in the FBI with authority over counterintelligence operations, with daily briefings on threats to national security, with the power to influence investigations into foreign espionage. Durbin's voice rose with righteous fury. And at the exact same time, you were ordering loyalty polygraphs for career FBI agents to determine whether they had criticized you personally. You subjected decorated veterans of the Bureau to interrogations about their political opinions while exempting your own deputy from basic security screening. The hypocrisy was now laid bare for every American to see. Patel had created two FBIs, one where Trump loyalists were above security protocols, and another where career professionals were subjected to political loyalty tests. Director Patel, Durbin said, his voice now carrying absolute moral condemnation. You have betrayed every principle the FBI stands for. You have compromised national security to protect a political ally. You have weaponized security protocols against your critics while exempting your friends from those same protocols. And you have destroyed whatever credibility you might have had left. The aftermath was immediate and catastrophic. Within minutes, Patel admitted it was trending worldwide with over 3.2 million tweets. CNN broke into regular programming. FBI director admits deputy never passed polygraph. Fox News, despite their usual Trump administration support, led with Patel confession rocks Senate hearing. Even conservative commentator Ben Shapiro tweeted, "This is indefensible. You can't give security clearance to someone who failed the polygraph while testing your own agents for loyalty." The intelligence community response was swift and damning. Former CIA Director John Brennan told MSNBC, "This is one of the most serious security breaches I've seen in 40 years of intelligence work. If Bongino showed deception on questions about foreign contacts, he should never have been given access to classified intelligence, period." FBI agents who had been subjected to Patel's loyalty polygraphs gave anonymous interviews describing the intimidation and fear. "We had to answer questions about whether we'd ever criticize the director," one 23-year veteran told the Washington Post. Meanwhile, his deputy director couldn't pass a basic security screening, and nobody did anything about it. Within 48 hours, 3 separate investigations had been opened. one by the Department of Justice Inspector General, one by the Senate Intelligence Committee, and one by the House Oversight Committee. All three focused on the same question. What classified intelligence had Dan Bongino accessed while possessing a security clearance he should never have been granted? The national security implications were staggering. For 6 months, from July 2025, when Bongino became deputy director, until December, when Durbin exposed the scandal, America's second highest ranking FBI official had been reading the president's daily brief, attending classified briefings on foreign intelligence operations, and overseeing counterintelligence investigations, all while carrying a security clearance granted despite failing the examination designed to prevent foreign infiltration. Every intelligence briefing Bongino attended is now compromised. A former NSA official told CNN, every foreign intelligence service will assume he was a potential source. Every CIA operation he had knowledge of is now at risk. This is a catastrophic security failure. But perhaps the most damning revelation came from FBI whistleblowers who began speaking out within days of Patel's confession. 7 current and former FBI security officers gave interviews describing how they had been ordered to fast-track Bongino's clearance despite the polygraph results. We were told this came from the very top. One security officer told ProPublica. The message was clear. Find a way to get Bongino cleared, regardless of the polygraph. When we pushed back and said the results showed deception, we were told that wasn't our decision to make. The whistleblowers described a systematic pattern where Trump loyalists received special treatment while career FBI professionals were subjected to unprecedented scrutiny. If you were seen as a Patel critic, you got polygraphed about your loyalty, one agent said. If you were a Trump appointee, you got a waiver. Within 72 hours of Durbin's questioning, Dan Bongino announced he would be stepping down as deputy director effective immediately. His statement made no mention of the polygraph or the security clearance scandal. Instead, he thanked Trump, Attorney General Pam Bondi, and Kash Patel for the opportunity to serve. But Bongino's departure didn't resolve the central question: what had he accessed during his 6 months with compromised security clearance? Intelligence officials would spend months trying to answer that question, conducting damage assessments, reviewing every classified briefing he had attended, every intelligence report he had read, every foreign operation he had been briefed on. The political fallout was swift and bipartisan. Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer called for Patel's immediate resignation. You cannot serve as FBI director after admitting you gave security clearance to someone who failed the polygraph. This is disqualifying. More surprisingly, Republican senators began quietly distancing themselves. Senator Josh Hawley, typically a staunch Trump defender, told reporters if someone can't pass a polygraph, they shouldn't have access to classified intelligence. That's not a partisan issue. That's basic security. The White House initially tried to defend Patel, with Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt claiming the polygraph waiver was routine and followed established protocols. But when reporters pointed out that no deputy director in FBI history had ever received such a waiver, the White House went silent. Within days, Trump stopped mentioning Patel's name, a telling sign that he was cutting loose another liability. Legal experts noted that Patel's confession created potential criminal exposure. If Bongino accessed classified information knowing he hadn't passed the required security screening, that's potentially a violation of federal law. Former federal prosecutor Ken White explained. And if Patel knowingly granted that access despite the polygraph results, he could face charges as well. The 62 seconds between Durbin's question and Patel's confession became required viewing in law schools as the perfect example of how to trap a witness with documentary evidence and simple logic. Durbin built a box with no escape, one law professor told his students. Yes or no, did he pass? There was no bureaucratic language that could answer that question without admitting the truth. By mid-December 2025, Patel's position was completely untenable. The confession, combined with the mounting evidence of systematic abuse of polygraph protocols, the intelligence community's loss of confidence, and Trump's conspicuous silence made him the most embattled FBI director in history. Congressional Democrats introduced legislation requiring Senate confirmation for all polygraph waivers for senior intelligence officials. The bill was named the Bongino Amendment, a pointed reminder of the scandal that had exposed the vulnerability in FBI security protocols. But beyond the political theater and the legislative responses, Durbin's 62-second trap had exposed something more fundamental about Patel's FBI. It was an institution where loyalty to Trump mattered more than national security, where political allies were protected while career professionals were persecuted, where the rules applied to everyone except the people making the rules. Former FBI Director James Comey, who had been fired by Trump in 2017, wrote in a Washington Post op-ed, "The FBI is supposed to be independent from political pressure precisely to prevent this kind of corruption. When the director uses security protocols as weapons against critics while exempting allies from those same protocols, the entire institution loses credibility." The ultimate irony wasn't lost on FBI agents who had spent years investigating foreign espionage. We're trained to identify security risks, one counterintelligence agent said. Someone who fails a polygraph on questions about foreign contacts and financial relationships. That's exactly the profile we look for when hunting foreign spies. And Patel gave that person access to our most sensitive intelligence. By January 2026, the damage assessment was still ongoing. Intelligence officials were reviewing 6 months of classified briefings, trying to determine what Bongino had accessed and what foreign intelligence services might have learned. The CIA was reassessing sources and methods that Bongino had been briefed on. The NSA was reviewing signals intelligence operations he had knowledge of. The security breach is worse than we initially thought, one intelligence official told reporters on Background. Bongino had access to human intelligence sources, technical collection capabilities, ongoing counterintelligence operations. If any of that information was compromised, intentionally or not, people's lives could be at risk. Senator Durbin's warning to Patel in his closing statement proved prophetic. You will be remembered, Director Patel, not for anything you accomplished, but for the day you admitted under oath that you gave security clearance to someone who couldn't pass the polygraph designed to protect national security. That will be your legacy. Sometimes the most devastating congressional testimony doesn't require hours of aggressive questioning. Sometimes it just requires a senator with documentary evidence, a simple yes or no question, and a director foolish enough to think he could evade the truth. In 62 seconds, Dick Durbin proved that even the FBI director couldn't escape basic logic. Either Dan Bongino passed his polygraph or he didn't. And when Kash Patel finally admitted yes, Bongino had failed. Yes, he'd been given a waiver anyway. Yes, he'd accessed classified intelligence despite showing deception. The double standard was exposed for every American to see. The polygraph tests weren't about security. They were about loyalty. And in Patel's FBI, loyalty to Trump was the only security clearance that mattered.